Hello everyone, I want to show you a game from 1857, and this is from the match between Louis Paulsen and Paul plans and basic techniques of analysis that you can use and apply to your game. So it doesn't matter what year the game is from. These principles are applicable even today. So let's start. Paulsen has the white pieces, Morphy the black. The game started off in classical form e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6. So we have this that white is attacking the center here, e4, and normal continuation we would see is just simply e takes d4, and there's very here Morphy played this move bishop b4, uh, and it's just as good. He simply continues development. It's attack on the center. His argument is that White's attack on the center with d4 is rather premature. So already there's a little jewel in this game that you don't have to stick to the main lines playing e takes d4 here. You can just throw a monkey wrench in your opponent's preparation by playing bishop b4, simply counterattacking the center of yourself as Morphy did. Paulsen followed up immediately with an inaccuracy and played bishop b5. Now, um, the argument and reasoning is that White realized that he can't really protect his own center. All right, so um, what he tries to do is counterattack Black's center instead. At this point, White really has to acquiesce to d5, which is just fine for Black. It equalizes. This changes the texture of the position. If the knight e7, knight takes 5, and this is what I'm talking about. We see that Black loses a pawn, but watch what happens. So, for example, d6. You can throw that check in there, right, just to be annoying. King f8, knight f3, and knight takes e4 again, just destroying the white center, and then bishop d2. All right, and then of course Black can either take the bishop pair immediately, or he can choose to double up White's pawns by exchanging twice on c3. Another idea is if White tries to pin with bishop g5, then e takes d4, knight takes d4, h6, knight takes, b takes, bishop goes back to d2, and again we see the pressure on e4. It's very difficult for for White to maintain the center. And again, just a sample continuation, and as we can see here, Black uh, ends up being up a pawn actually, but since he is a little behind in development, White has some slight compensation. So back to the game. After bishop b4, bishop b5 was played, and Morphy immediately just played knight takes e4. So White center is destroyed, and now knight takes c3 is a threat, and so now the queen is forced to defend. Queen d3. Notice how Black has taken the initiative in the game already, right? Forcing a powerful piece like the queen to have to defend. Morphy simply plays d5, right? Strengthening the position of his knight with d5, and he opens up the position so he can play his bishop out, right? Nice economical play by Morphy. Another thing he could have played, variation, is knight takes c3, b takes, and then queen e7, with the idea of c takes b4 and then just simply e4. And if queen e3, then e takes f3. And black is better here also. Instead, Morphy played the natural looking d5, and knight takes e5 was played. Alright, so this position, as you can see, is highly symmetrical, and as I always talk about symmetrical positions, is he who has the initiative is going to wind up taking over the game. Both sides castle here, and knight takes e5 from Morphy. Alright, and Morphy is the first now to take over the initiative, so he makes this trade. And now d takes e5, he captures on c3 and c6. Notice how black is controlling the game with the initiative. Alright, now black knocks the bishop back to a4 where it's unprotected, and this kind of puts money in the bank for black to continue his initiative. He plays queen a5, attacking the bishop and the c3 pawn. Okay, bishop e3, queen takes c3. Alright, so now is Morphy just capturing to be capturing? No. Queen takes c3. Besides capturing the pawn, he also threatens another pawn on e5, and he threatens the rook on a1. Okay, so this gives you a blueprint of how you should be trying to play, creating moves, making moves rather, that create threats and put tremendous pressure on your opponent. This is the crux of Morphy's style, is that he puts tremendous pressure on the opponent with every move, constantly threatening, right? Constantly pushing in the position once he gets the initiative. F4. This is the only move here that can meet both threats. So the rook on a1 is protected and the pawn on e5 is protected. However, the downside of that move is that the bishop on f4 is in the passive defending role. So yes, white's pieces are out, but what are they doing? The queen is, defending, right, doing a menial task on d3. The bishop on b3 is blocked out of the position again, just looking like a glorified pawn, and the bishop on f4 again not attacking but defending. All right, if you can get your opponent's pieces in situations like this where they're merely defensive players in the game and very passive, all right, you're on your way, okay, to securing a good game and victory. Bishop f5. Notice, contrast the difference between black's light square bishop and white's light square bishop. Okay, black is ready to win material with the discovered attack as soon as this knight goes somewhere. You see the difference in aggressiveness? Okay, so keep your pieces active, opponent's pieces passive. Right, so black's keeping that strong pressure on the white position. Right, he is one material already, but he continues to threaten the queen on d3. Okay, and now again Paulsen is forced to make another passive move, rook ac1. All right, this is all to protect the c pawn here because the queen is going to have to move. Again, how do we keep the initiative going? Morphy plays g5. This goes after the e5 pawn. All right, and this forces white to trade queens. Queen takes c3. Knight takes c3. Okay, and now here there's a problem because the bishop is attacked here. There's also a threat of knight e2 here. Okay, so white's only real remedy is to play bishop e3 and just simply give up the second pawn on e5. So play could go queen takes e5, and then perhaps white can try to gain his own initiative, maybe bishop d4, okay, or a move like f4 and try to gain his own initiative in the position. White's only hope here is just try to open up the position and profit off of the open or semi-open G file. So White would have to pull out all the stops here, but I don't think he has enough compensation in the position here. So back to the game. At the G5, Queen takes C3, Knight takes C3, Bishop takes G5, so he gives up the exchange. So King H1, Knight takes C1, Rook takes C1, Rook F E8, still attacking, right? Still attacking, even though he's winning the game. He's careful not to give his opponent the initiative. I think this is one of the things that Morphy knew at a very young age. That his opponents didn't quite grasp all the way. His play was very systematic, right? And he went from one plan to the next. Even though he lived during romantic and attacking era of chess, he wasn't just attacking haphazardly. Okay, he had actual plans in the position. He wasn't just going threat to threat and random threats, and looking for combinations, but he had plans, and he also knew that once he had the initiative, that was the most important thing that he can have, right? He would not allow his opponent to have the initiative at the cost of, say, winning material or something like that. Game continued, Bishop F6, just holding again. You know, defensive, but at least the bishop is in a better position. Problem for White is that, now he's down exchange and pawns, and he just doesn't have enough. I mean, he's not going to be able to mate White here. Okay, so now Morphy switches gears here. He has this 4-2 queenside pawn majority, and he just starts pushing it. He starts with the move b5. More accurate is probably a5, say c4, a4, and bishop d1, and then rook a5. All right, that's a very strong continuation. But he played b5, which stops c4 altogether. f3, and now a4. Again, switching gears, threatening to win the bishop. a3, and now bishop e6. Why bishop e6? Well, Morphy again wants to keep his pawns excuse me. Morphy wants to keep his pawns mobile, and he wants to play c5 next. And so in order to play c5, he needs to protect this pawn right here. Okay, so White now plays rook d1 to stop that, so that if c5, there's a double attack here. Okay, now the thing here is Morphy played b4 here, which is just fine, but Black's position is so strong that he can play c5 anyway if he wanted to. Okay, for example, if bishop takes d5, then just simply rook a d8. He can just actually give up the exchange here. It's not a problem. Of course, you would just take. Morphy played a human move and played b4, and what this does is develop his rook. So, for instance, now if Paulsen tried to keep the position closed and play a4, then just c5 here. Again, with the same idea, giving up that pawn, and then rook a d8. This shows us another important principle is the mobility of the pawns. Max Erver once said in the book The Middle Game, speaking of pawn majorities, okay, he says that if at any time your pawn majority is blocked, that is a serious problem for you. Okay, you're probably going to wind up, losing, especially if the position is kind of symmetrical on both sides, or your opponent has his own majority. If your majority gets blocked for any reason, your position can become very weak. So it is important at all costs to always keep your pawns mobile. And this is what you see in some of these variations. That's why I wanted to show you the variation here. If white tried to just block and play a4, okay. Fortunately for black, he has this move c5. Right, the pawns stay mobile, and again, if bishop takes d5, then you see the tactics prevailing, and of course the pawns will keep rolling after all subsequent exchanges. So here, let's say c4, then simply b takes c3. Bishop takes, rook takes. Bishop b3 is really the only move here. Rook takes d1. Bishop takes d1, and the dagger, bishop f5 here. And you can see c2 is pretty much unstoppable without outrageous moves. Again, this is to illustrate that the pawns must be kept mobile at all costs. Back to the game, after b4, white didn't play the move a4, but just simply exchanged. A takes b4, and now we see Morphy has open a file. So h3, this creates a escape for the king. And now c5, again, Morphy knows what's going on. All right, the pawn cannot be really captured without losing the game. Paulsen plays c3. He's sacrificing a pawn. Well, why sacrifice a pawn at this stage? Well, he just wants to create a blockade on c2. Again, what's the idea? Demobilize the pawns. B takes c3, bishop c2, and now rook a2. Why rook a2? Not only just possessing the second rank, but to break the blockade now. Okay. Rook c1 by white. Now what are we seeing? We're seeing a pattern here. The pattern we're seeing is the opponent, or we're seeing white trying to mobilize his pieces, and then we're seeing Morphy attacking and causing the opponent to put his pieces in passive positions. All right. So the rook was on the d file, right, in the attacking scenario, and now is forced to be on c1. All right. If you don't learn anything from this game, learn that it is good to, or learn to try to make your pieces as active as possible and constantly attack your opponent's pieces to make them go to passive squares. Look at Morphy's rooks. And now bishop g5. Bishop g5 is played in order to give the c1 rook some protection here. Now that Morphy is up all of this material, in exchange and a few pawns, now he goes for the simplification. Very logical. Rook a1, simply to exchange rooks, and now bishop b1. And basically the last ditch effort to keep that rook on c1 from getting traded off. Morphy, being a brilliant tactician, just plays the move c2. The pawn can't be captured, right, without losing the game. Of course, if rook takes c2, then just simply rook takes b1. And if bishop takes c2, then simply rook takes c1, bishop takes c1, followed by rook a1. And this bishop on c1 is pinned, the king is here, and the game is over. So Paulsen actually resigned after the move c2. So that was a fantastic game by the legendary Paul Morphy, all the way in 1857. Again, you do not need to look at the latest games, right, from grandmasters to learn how to play chess. I have a theory on that too, and basically how to learn. I'll do another video about like actually studying chess and how to get, how I think is the best way to improve and the kind of way to approach chess. But that's for probably the next video. Here, like I said, I want you to understand, just some of the basic themes that we went over to conclude this video. One is just notice Morphy's mastery of the initiative once he got it, okay, and how he counterattacked in the center here. He kept developing his pieces, and he never really took the pressure off black. Once black made once white made um not a bad move, but just a move where um it gave black a little break after d4. He played bishop b4 and immediately just started counterattacking in the position. And the biggest thing to take from this game against again is how he forced all of the um, white's pieces into passive positions constantly. Right, taking over the position, constantly attacking, just constantly putting pressure on the opponent here and making the game look very simple. And then at the end, he started pushing the pawn majority. Okay, and I have another video on using the pawn flanks, and this is what Morphy uses to push his majority. Is you want to keep all the pawns connected. They march like soldiers, like one and another, and you keep them all lined up. And this is the idea of the pawn flanks. Very useful tool. Again, there's c5. Of course, white tries to stop it, but and falls to the great tactics of the legendary Paul Morphy there. So I hope you like that video. Again, as I always say, please like and subscribe. Please support my channel via donation. That is in the first link below. And then below that, find links to DVDs/books on the opening that is presented on the board today. So here we have 4 nights game. Scotch game, so we'll have some DVDs like posted below on that. And books if you still like look at actual books on these particular openings. And probably in my next video, I'll probably go look into like how you can study and learn like some methods that are good for learning. I'll give you a hint though, and the hint is to stay away from the top grandmaster games of the day. And I look forward to your comments, and I will see you guys on the next video.